Alright, hello and welcome to the third video on reading and learning strategies. This is about underlining and highlighting, and I realize not everybody underlines and highlights these days, but just in case you do, I would like to show you the right way to do it, because there are wrong ways and there are right ways. And also I want to point out that if you don't, maybe it would be a good idea to start, assuming of course that you do it the right way. So let's get going. And this video, remember, you need to have read this type A behavior and heart disease reading. So if you have not read that yet, please pause the video and give it a good read. Alright, now assuming you have read this, what I'm going to do is my imitation of a college freshman. Now if you're a freshman, please don't be offended. I'm exaggerating to clarify, but I'm going to give my impression of a college well-meaning, actually this is not just freshmen, there's a lot of college students. My imitation of a lot of college students underlining a text. I'm just going to do the first paragraph. So here we go. Getting into the character. Alright, here we go. Now I'm going to, if you've watched video number 1, you know it's a good idea to look at the title and turn it into a question. So I would say, okay, what is the connection between type A behavior and heart disease? And maybe what is type A behavior? Type A, the idea of a type A personality has kind of entered the common vernacular, but let's pretend it hasn't. Okay, pretend the idea of type A behavior is new to us. Okay, so I'm reading and I have my trusty pen with me to underline. Here I go. Okay, can a person's feelings or thoughts have any influence? Okay, that's good. Okay, that's an important question. Okay, that was a question asked in the 1950s. Okay, Meyer, Friedman, and Ray Rosenman, they were the people involved, so I should get that too. They're cardiologists, most of their colleagues. Okay, that looks important. I better make sure to learn that later. Okay, let's see. Very early, important clue appeared in 1952. An innocent comment from, okay, all right, that looks good. Colster, okay, this looks important. Again, I need to make sure I learn that later. All the chairs in the waiting room. Okay, okay, excellent. Okay, okay, right. Okay, well, important stuff. All right. Ooh, here's a definition. Type A behavior. Better underline that. Better make sure to get that later. End scene. Okay, that was my imitation of really how not to underline, because when you think about why you underline or highlight, the point of underlining or highlighting any text is that you want to get the key points. You want to emphasize the key points so that when you're studying, when you're looking back over this later, you don't have to read everything. Now, notice what I've done. I've basically underlined everything except the word the. This is not going to help me at all. When I look back at this, it's not going to save me any time to try to read this. In fact, it's a mess. And you know what? I really didn't learn anything from it. That's the problem. When you're underlining this way, it's kind of mindless. There's not much effort you put into it, but you also don't get anything out of it. I mean, you sit, you go to the library, you take your book, you underline like this, you're not engaged, you're not paying attention. At the end of it, you look back, you didn't have any fun, and you don't know anything either. This is not the way to go about it. As I said, a lot of people do this. I have done it. You know, I did it earlier, years and years ago. I don't do it anymore. There is a better way. So, what do we do instead of underlining everything, or almost everything? Well, let's try it again. Here's the read. Again, we're going to make the title is going to read to find the answers to those questions. Now, here's the thing. Here's one thing I want you to remember. If you are tempted to underline or highlight anything ever, the number one thing you have to remember is you never underline or highlight anything that you have not yet read. Why is that? It's because the things you underline or highlight are supposed to be the key points. How in the world do you know what the key points are if you haven't read the thing yet? So you read first. Okay, so we go through and we actually read this. Now for the rest of this technique, this underlining and highlighting technique, so note, before I was underlining as I read. In fact, what I want to do is read before underlining. Now for the rest of this technique, I want you to imagine that someone is studying with you, because it's always more fun to study with a friend than to just sit with a book open in front of you. It's always more fun to hand a book to a friend and say, here, quiz me, than to just read through things yourself. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to imagine a friend quizzing us. Matter of fact, we're going to create questions that our friend could use to quiz us. Matter of fact, we're going to create questions that we can use to quiz ourselves and be our own best friend. So what we will do is we'll read this, and then once we've read the paragraph or a chunk of the section, whatever, it's up to you to decide how much you want to read. I think a paragraph is good. Once we've read it, we will come up with a question or two that were answered in the passage and that reflect something that might be on the exam. So after reading this paragraph, and remember, this was a great story about the upholsterer noticing this thing on the chairs. It wasn't these highfalutin doctors who made this connection. It was the upholsterer who kind of provided the spark here. It's a nice story. I think one question answered in the paragraph: how and when was the link between type A behavior and heart disease discovered? Now, by the way, this didn't translate well. Notice I've got BEH for behavior, and I've got I wanted to have a little heart symbol here for heart disease. That didn't translate well for some reason, but I'll put it in there. The idea is you can abbreviate. Oh, and by the way, I'm writing these questions in the margin of the text. So when I write them off to the side, that represents the margin of your text, which you paid for and own, and therefore you can mark it up the way you want. Even if it's a rental text, I think they allow you to mark it up. So mark the heck out of it. You bet it. Just do it. Whatever helps you learn. So I write a question: how and when was the link between type A behavior and heart disease discovered? That was answered. Another question answered in the reading. Now I have to redo my heart. Another question answered in the reading: what is type A behavior? Again, pretend you never heard that before, and that this passage is your introduction to type A behavior. All right, so these are questions that were answered in the reading, and these are questions that our friend could quiz us on. We go to a friend and say, here, quiz me. The questions are in the margin, and we can use these to quiz ourselves later. So that's the first part of the method, is you write these questions. And notice we haven't underlined a darn thing yet. This is supposed to be about an underlining or highlighting technique. We haven't underlined anything. Now we can actually go to the underlining part, and we're going to be very judicious, very shrewd about what we underline. We're not going to underline things willy-nilly and just blah, and not be engaged. What we're going to underline are the answers to these questions. We've created questions. We're going to underline their answers. And what's more, we're going to play a little game. We're going to underline as little as possible. We are going to endeavor to underline just enough so that this friend of ours, who's quizzing us but may not be in the same class as us, this friend of ours is going to know that we've given the right answer, and no more. So I'm looking at this story. I say, how and when was the link between type A behavior and heart disease discovered? I'm going to underline just enough so that my friend knows I've given the right answer. What am I going to underline? How much? I'll show you how much. This much. That's it. The one word, chairs. Because if my friend asks me how and when was the link discovered, and I launch into this story about the chairs, and I've got chairs underlined, that's going to cue my friend to say, oh yeah, yep, that's it, that's right. That's right. He or she, or if it's my friend would say, yep, he's got the right answer. More to the point, remember why we highlight or underline in the first place. It's so that when we come back to this, we can review quickly and just hit the key points. Well, when I come back to this reading and I see that word chairs underlined, guess what? That whole story comes rushing back into my consciousness. I say, chairs, oh yeah, that was with the chairs and the upholsterer. Okay, so that really is all I need to underline. That is enough. Now, the question doesn't, I look at this, I say, well, maybe I would want to know who the cardiologists were. I didn't put that in the question. Maybe, even though it's not in the question, I might think that's important and I might want to add it. I might want to underline the 1950s because, after all, we're asked when was the link discovered. I certainly am not going to underline any more than this. And to be honest, I don't know that I would even underline 1950s. You know why? Because the chairs I have in my mind in this mental picture in the office are 1950s chairs. They're like these tube steel chairs with orange and yellow and red naugahyde on them, which is really more of a 60s thing, but in my mind it's 50s. So it's like a 50s waiting room in this doctor's office. A window in back, the Fonz driving by on a motorcycle. See, when I was a kid, there was a show called Happy Days, which took place in the 50s, and there was a character called the Fonz. Anyway, the Fonz driving by in the background, picture of Eisenhower on the wall. It's a 50s room. So when I see that word chairs and it cues that whole story, I'm going to think 1950s automatically. In any event, I'm certainly not going to underline more than I have here. Now let's go to the second question. What is type A behavior? Well, Down here, when I was underlining willy-nilly, I underlined all of those last 3 lines. Am I going to underline the phrase type A behavior? The answer, no. I'm not going to underline the phrase type A behavior because that's in the question. Am I going to underline the words several psychological characteristics? Absolutely not. Because I am going to underline hurry, always being in a hurry, easily move to hostility and anger, high levels of competitiveness and ambition. I am underlining all of those things, and guess what? Those are psychological characteristics, and there are several of them. So I don't need to underline the words several psychological characteristics. And am I going to underline that may be linked to the incidence of heart disease? Certainly not, because if they weren't thought to be linked to the incidence of heart disease, they wouldn't be in this passage to begin with. So after going through this paragraph, writing the questions and underlining, that's all I've got. And that's it. Now notice, we just spent quite a bit of time on this. When I was going through and doing it automatically and mindlessly, it probably took me about 30 seconds. This took a few minutes. Part of that is that I'm yapping the whole time. I'm telling you what to do. If you're doing this on your own, it'll be quicker. But the point I want you to see is that, you know what, this study stuff, it should take a little longer. It should take you longer, but be worth something. What I was doing before was quick but useless. What we're doing now takes more time, but you actually learn something. That is the key here. It takes more time, but you actually learn something. And also now, remember what underlining and highlighting are for. You've got key points to review. When you come back to this, when you're reading your notes, I mean, notice, again, you can cover up the text and quiz yourself over the questions. The answers are there in the text. Or if you're just going back and rereading, all you're reading are these things in red, and there's not much there. It's going to be a lot quicker. You know, the question really is, would you rather review what's underlined here or what's underlined here? I think the choice is clear. So this, I believe, for some reason I keep thinking there was something I forgot, but I don't think there is. I think this does, in fact, conclude video number 3 of Reading and Learning Strategies on underlining and highlighting. Thanks again for your time and your attention.